All right, what is up, you guys? It has been a while since I've done a video, but it is obviously the end of January. It is February 2nd as I'm filming this, Super Bowl Sunday, so we got a video recap for you guys. This month, very happy how this went. Made 19,500, which is the most I've ever made in trading. Super stoked about that. And not in terms of money, but just overall month, I just traded really, really well. I learned a lot about myself in terms of how I want to improve and go forward as a trader, which I'll talk about towards the end. But yeah, I decided, and actually this month I took the most trades I've ever taken. I took 46 trades, which is a new high for me. Not necessarily a good or bad thing, just something I noticed. So there's no way I'm gonna have enough time to go over all those trades. So I actually meticulously went through each one and tried to find what were the best trades that had the best lessons that I would want to emphasize to you guys, because there were plenty of trades this month that were they're just trades that didn't learn anything, didn't break any rules, they just didn't work or they did work. So I tried to pull out all the best trades that had the best lessons, and so we're going to go through those in timely order, week by week that they showed up. So first one was on the January 3rd and January 6th. So the second and third day of the month, which was INPX. So I'm not going to pull up the daily chart on this one because it did a reverse split shortly after this run, which screws up the daily chart. But if you could just see here on the intraday, it goes from 10, 11 cents all the way up to 60. So at that point, I'm looking to get short. I'm looking to see the backside of this, get the backside of this move. And so you can see here though, it closed at 30 cents the previous day, but then it gapped up to 50 cents. I mean, it's almost 100% gap. Oh wait, see, it screws up there. The real split. Okay, but anyway, so we come into this morning, and if there's anything I've learned from Nasdaqs from the last 6 months, it's you got to be patient, right? So I would not in any way, shape, or form want to get short in the morning. Okay, you let it spike out, totally squeeze everyone out, break pre-market highs, and then it pulls right pretty hard, bounces, and tries to make a new higher high here, right? It tries to kind of continue this uptrend and it fails. So at this point, I'm thinking, it could easily go higher, right? It's a huge gap up. It's on its big run, but at the same time, we're almost up 100% at this point. In fact, I think we are at this point up 100%. And we just had this big pull. All these green candles of volume are now underwater, right? There's now people who were tried along, and they're now down on their position. And so I'm thinking, you know what? Let me take a starter. Okay, I took a starter, I believe, right in this pull or in this pull, one of the two. I can't remember. But the point was, I was going to risk, the 65-cent high, and then we pull, right? We get this pull to a new lower low, and at this point, I'm convinced I'm going to be right? That's kind of a confirmation. That's the first bit of confirmation. So I quickly add in this for next green candle, right? Right into this balance, I add, and then pulls again. I believe I take most of it off here, if not hold a little bit, and then take it off into this bounce. But at that point, I was done. I believe I held, actually, no, I held a little bit longer, right? I wanted this, I think it doesn't show VWAP now, but VWAP was right around here. So it tested VWAP, it failed. So I held it, kept going, and then you notice here it took a double bottom, right? And normally that's not the worst thing in the world because it could just double bottom, bounce again, and then fail, which it almost did here. So I didn't take any off. But then you start seeing it. I mean, it's kind of hard to see, but after so much practice, you can see it more easily. This action here is different now, right? It immediately starts going sideways. First it was straight up, kind of straight down, straight up again, and then grinding down. And now it's grinding up, right? This is more of consolidated action, right? This isn't, slowly bouncing and fading to then start breaking new lows. This started making higher highs again, right? And it's actually ended up breaking this 45 double top from here to here. And so at that point, I thought to myself, right, this is over, right? Any chance of this going lower, it's not going to happen. So whatever I had left, I think I had a third or a quarter of my position left, barely any position left. I just cut it, right? And that ended up being the right decision. It never went lower the rest of the day. So I believe that was, how much was that? Yeah, I believe I made over 11,000 or 11,000, 1,100. So that was a really, really cool gain. Super happy about that because it didn't even go red that day, right? This stock is still green. So the next day I was even more interested, which is now the 6th. Well, we're messing up here with the chart. Let's see how far we can go before it screws up. Okay, we're good. So we go in here. Next day, it gaps up again, but then this time quickly fails, right out the open. Okay, so I start getting short in these bounces. expecting it to go right after, bagging everyone again, because all these longs are technically still underwater. Like a lot of them sold, but there's always that one dude, or multiple people, in this case, that just haven't sold yet, right? They're still holding on and hoping. So eventually they're going to give up, and that's what they did. So like pulls still hasn't gone red yet, keeps holding, keeps holding. But again, see how this action is different from prior, right? You could say this is the same case where it made a double bottom and is not going any lower. But look how the bounces just keep going and it's still sideways. It's still sideways. And then you get the crack, right? Versus what I was explaining to you on the day prior, you know, it's not doing that here, right? It's starting to make higher highs and actually starting to start uptrending again. Then go back to comparing here, right? Let's get it so we can look closer. It's there's no higher highs here, right? It is continually fading lower and lower and lower. Volume is low, and then we crack. Now, the unfortunate part about this trade is that I covered it all right here, which again is not a bad trade. Really, really awesome. But then absolutely got destroyed. I think actually right here is when they announced they were going to do a reverse split. Why that was so negative for the stock, I don't necessarily know, other than the fact that everyone knows they're non-compliant, so they had to do a reverse split. That might have been it, but it totally just killed the stock. I was all covered. I completely missed this move to the downside. Super frustrating, but at the same time, I can't predict that they're going to announce news and that the stock would take it so negatively. But I did make another 600, covering down here. So that was on the 6th. And then let's go to the next one. Then we're going to skip all the way to the 14th. All these trades were just simple, nice gains. There's no real lesson about them, nothing important to show you guys. But on the 14th, we had a few runners. One was LJPC. And so you see this wick here on the 4th green day. Of course, I'm looking for the first red day, right? This wick actually kind of caught me, and I had to take a loss, which is why I want to go over it. Because this is just one of those plays that just isn't going to work, right? Everyone's not going to have a 100% win rate. And, sometimes even if you made no mistakes, like even if you were a perfect robot, right, and you didn't make any emotional mistakes, just from trading different tickers, like every ticker just isn't going to work. And this is one of them. So same thing, right? Every day it's going up, no big gaps. But on this day, it actually had a quite larger gap. And so I was interested in seeing, could this gap hold or would it fail? Because if it fails, it's likely going to go red. And so red was clearly right here was like $7. And so you see here, right at the open, morning spike, completely stuffs and fails. I start getting short in these lower highs, almost very similar to INPX. Like you saw the stuff and you saw two attempts to make a higher high and didn't. And so I started getting short and I started pulling. So I thought, okay, I'm probably going to be right here. This bounce was much more stronger than I expected. But I did add, I said, we're risking, the $8 level up here. I should be okay. And then I pull up. So I'm like, okay, this is like, just looking, like, let me just scroll back here. Just looking at this chart, like before you see any of this, this looks like it's going to die, right? This looks like it's over, right? This is a significant pull in the morning, a significant now bounce that's failed. I would argue 7, 8 times out of 10, this should die. I should have gone red and I should have covered in the mid sixes. But that just didn't happen, right? Whatever the case may be, it either lack of sellers or just lack of or extreme amount of buyers that wanted to keep this up, but it just started grinding back and zombieing its way back. So by the time it started breaking, these highs and then the next high over 8, I was out. Unfortunately, it is what it is, but it's just one of those plays where it looked as good as it did here, and the next thing you know, it just didn't break down. So that's just the loss you have to take. So I lost, I think, about $300 or so on the 14th. I think it was like 370 or something. But overall, I had a win because the next play I had was ADAP. Actually, before I go over that, let's go back to LJPC. The next day, it had a gap down, right, and totally died, right, and I completely missed this, right. It just gapped down too low for me, considering how much of a pain this gave me the day prior in terms of it grinding back and spiking. I was almost certain that I would be able to get a better entry towards the red green level, which was like around $9. But we didn't. Right when it opened at 850, I mean, it never went higher than that the rest of the day. So I just missed it. I didn't feel comfortable getting short in the mid eights, risking anywhere close to 9 if I couldn't get a better entry up here. So that was that. Missed that side, that red day. But ADAP, massive runner, from 150 to, now $6 in less than 2 days. It gapped up to $6 after the first big run. And so let's go to intraday here. Let's see, probably go to 1 month, bring it in. And also, I don't know if you saw that on the daily chart, the gap up day when it had the wick kind of had a fake out, right? Let's see that. Yeah, you can see that here, and that was super important, right? You see the high here was 850, right? And so then look at my line. So 850 on the left, and then look how it broke the new high on the new day, right? See how it just broke? It just barely broke and then failed. And also look at the volume. Look how big this volume is the entire day, right? It's pretty much sustained itself, but then look how this volume just died off, right? Of course, this is in hindsight. Of course, this is after it's already failed so much. But you can see here, like some things like this, like a failed breakout, and this fade, like the fading volume here confirms like after the fact. I know it's like not doesn't help you in real time, but it's just something to notice, right? It's something to tell you like, yeah, this is how this was supposed to die the entire time. Like this volume was never going to sustain itself. Just no one knew in real time until after the fact. So yeah, this is bound to happen. Um, so again, again, it wasn't going to be impulsive or quick. I was going to be patient, let it spike, and it failed. Right, quick, massive fake out breakout. Again, all these massive volume now, our massive buyers now in underwater. And again, look, it's weird how this is. I didn't even notice this. Like INPX, what was the other one? Yeah, LJPC, right? And now ADAP have had these attempts to try to like make a higher high. Like it's trying to have these bounces and it's trying to kind of keep the run going. And it can't. It can't go any higher, right? Whether you watch level two, whether you watch the price action, it is clearly it was telling me like this isn't going higher, right? And so I got short again. It pulled. I then quickly started taking some off into this action. I kind of got a little scared at first, seeing how now this is grinding upwards. Like it had its pull. Okay, it's still holding. Now it's grinding upward. I'm thinking like, oh man, this is gonna squeeze me. Like again, because this is still green in the day. Like this is not something I want to be massively aggressive on while it's still green, right? Um, so I kind of covered almost all my position. I had a little bit left, but then all of a sudden, I thought to myself, I kind of calmed down. I kind of got myself together, and I said, if they were gonna squeeze it, like they would have done it already, right? Like if they were gonna squeeze it, it would have been right here. Like see this big huge green these green candles trying to get something going and trying to like break this higher high and then failing. Excuse me. If they were gonna squeeze it, like if this was gonna be manipulated, that was the time to do it, right? That was gonna be the time where they should have just ripped it into new highs. And they didn't. And you clearly see here, let me zoom in, you had three candles of just like extreme died volume. And so at that point, I'm thinking, no, this is going to die. And so I quickly re-enter, like almost like the second before it starts pulling like this. So it just really confirmed with me, like, okay, I'm reading this very well. I know how this is working. And so again, I was now back into full size by the time this pulled. It went all the way down to the mid four or low fours. I took, I believe, most of it off for already like over $1,000 profit, and then I kept a little bit, right? I thought like this is so dead. This is up from the ones, right? And it's still in the fours. Like this is going to go lower. And so I held through this bounce, which took quite a long time. And in hindsight, it would have looked and been great if I had added back to my short. I just didn't do that. And then it keeps pulling. And at this point, it's making, see these little new lower days, like it's slowly making going lower on the day. But it wasn't selling off as hard as it would in the morning, right? I kind of started psyching myself out like this is not going down, right? This is now kind of like forming a good base of support. And so when huge wick like this out of nowhere, it wasn't that big, right? But in the moment, I'm like, crap, this is gonna squeeze. So I covered, which sucks because I could have probably covered, at the low here and had to hold throughout the whole day, and then now it goes red, so I missed that. But again, not a big deal. I made like I think 14 or 1500. Super happy with that. I think that's one of my largest NASDAQ gains I've ever had. So I'm super happy about that. It just towards the end, it's like I should have added once this bounce failed here, and I shouldn't have been so psyched out that it was gonna squeeze. Like I could have given a little more room to prove if it was gonna squeeze or not, but it's not the end of the world. So that was the 14th here, right? And so the next big lesson is the 16th and I believe 17th or 15th and 16th, um, which was with CETX. Now, just looking at the daily chart, you can tell how this usually ends, right? Even the 2 green days it has massive wicks. So clearly it sells off. And then ever since then, every day has been red. Maybe it closed green on the day, like up, but in terms of the candles on the daily chart, it's red. So clearly there's a spike and then it just dies into the open or into the close. And so that's what I was looking for. That's what I was looking, seriously looking to nail. It isn't a setup that I usually trade, but when it's so predictable as CETX does, as I've actually seen it happen real time in those previous days, I was very interested in nailing this. So again, gaps up. It's a first green day, so it's not something I'm going to be aggressive on. This is not like a bread and butter setup. It's just a play that I know, a particular stock play that happens over and over again, right? So unfortunately, I did make the mistake though of trading and getting small size in this choppiness, right? It was kind of looked like it was going to die, then it saved, die, and saved, and so I got caught shorting a small position, and so by the time it starts breaking these highs, I had to cut it. Took like a small like $200 loss. The problem is now I still have this thesis that it's going to die, right? Still, even though it's squeezed, like, okay, that's the squeeze, we're done, right? And so I start getting short again on these bounces, like that was the squeeze. Now it's just going to consolidate and eventually die. Again, that was not the case. It had a second, round of trying to squeeze, and so unfortunately, I had to cover again right into the like almost dead top. Again, it was small size. I only lost like a couple $100. So at this point, I'm down like $300 or $400 on the day. Um, and so at this point, I'm thinking, you know what? Like, again, I'm now having this realization like, this isn't your setup. This isn't something you trade normally, Kyle. Like, what are you doing? And so I kind of gave up. I just let this happen, was not really interested at all. And I kind of was almost ready to just throw in the towel. Like, I was just not going to trade this the rest of the day. Clearly, I'm wrong at this point. Um, but then I thought, I just kept going back to my conviction of like, this is going to die. Like, this is going to pull like it always has. And so I took a small starter, I think within this hour, and of course we get it, right? Finally, I saw it happen. I'm like, duh, Kyle, why didn't you just stay convicted the entire time? But again, you can't do that. Like when you're squeezing like this, like you just can't hold it because it's going to squeeze to 4 and then died back to 3 and I'd still been underwater, right? So that's not the right way to think about it. But again, it finally died. So like, holy shit, like I'm right. Like, yeah, you know what I mean? To finally fail 2 times in a row and to see it work, it's like perfect. I was right all along. And so I actually started adding quite some size to this bounce. Because I'd seen the chart the prior red day, how it happened, and when it dumped, it never came back after it's dumped. So I added into these bounces. I then covered a little bit into I believe the 190s or high 180s, and then I had the rest, and I was like, I'm gonna hold the rest, the next day, right? If you looked at the daily chart, you can go back every day. There's no second day. Like every day goes lower. Every day it's just fades longer. So I'm like, I'll hold a small piece overnight. I'm now green on the ticker, so it's cool, it's good. I'm gonna let it fade longer and pull out a couple hundred more dollars. Now, as I go on, you see what happens. They had put out like I don't even remember the news. It was like some stock buyback. Like they had the option to buy stock back, but they're also an incredibly dilutive company that sells shares. So it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's just a joke. Like the fact that they would say they'd buy shares back, and then also they're going to dilute millions of shares at the same time. Like it's just absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, they put that out, right? And so I'm short. Luckily, I kind of I don't know why I had this. I was so convicted that this was going to fade lower into the next day, but for some reason I had the urge that I need to watch this in after hours. Like who knows? Maybe it was someone up above telling me like you need to watch this position. But for some reason I was still at my computer. I was still watching it, and then I see this squeeze. I see it literally just ramp, and I'm like, holy crap! Like I have to get out. Like I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to stick around to find out. And so I cut it. I cut it in like the 230s, 240s. And unfortunately, I gave all my profits back, and I was now back to being red in the ticker. I ended up losing like $500 on that day. So just incredibly frustrating. And what I learned from this trade, it was like the ticker, the company, whoever's manipulating the stock can just run you over, right? Like if you're not careful, like luckily I traded the small size overall, so I only lost 400 or 500 over 3 losses. But it's like you know, you can get run over. Like just when you think that they can't play any more games with you or that you think you're right, Like, believe me, they can prove you wrong. You know what I mean? And that was just super humbling. I was just like, holy shit. Um, like this, I don't know what's gonna happen now. Like, right? Like this so it could leave you left me kind of speechless. Like I didn't know what to say. I was so dumbfounded at how much they could do to like really just mess you up in a position. Um, and again, it's not like a victim thing. It's not like, oh, they knew I was short. Like they're going to cut to get me. They're not out to get me. They're just trying to get their stock price up as much as possible. But it's amazing how much they can do to get to that point. And so if you're like betting against that, you're in for a ride. And that's what happened to me. But again, I know how these end, right? I still have conviction in this trade and in this kind of in how this stock moves and goes. It's still very dilutive, still has many shares to sell. And so even though great thing I cut it here because I avoided this entire squeeze. I'm now flat on the ticker. And I said, let me just get a fresh start the next day. And so that's what I did. Of course, I was still a little rattled from this day, so I took much smaller size the next day. But again, same thing, huge gap up, and you look at the volume, significantly lower, right? It still is high, right? But the highest candle on the second day is not even half of the highest candle on the first day, right? You can just clearly tell there's less volume, and any short that was in here that got squeezed, it was here, right? And here in pre-market and after hours. So at this point, when I see this failing multiple times, and see how this fails, like it's very choppy. There's a lot of wicks, but this choppy slash wick action is downtrending, right? This choppy slash wick action was uptrending. So you kind of have to kind of look back and see the forest from the trees and be like, there's a trend still, even though it's incredibly choppy. It's wick here, wick there, up, down. There's still a trend to be seen. And so I remember getting short, I believe, in this last lower high before this pull, and I just held. Like I was like, you know what, like the odds of this having a massive squeeze move again, is just so unlikely. I'm gonna keep trust this pattern, trust this chart, and that's what I did. And so I just took like very small pieces off, like every new low a day. And so by the time we had gotten to the 230s, 220s, which was support from yesterday, all up, the 220s right here from the prior day prior, I was a lot idle covered. I made my $500 back. It would have been nice to size up and obviously make more than I lost. Like that's the goal. But obviously from getting just chopped around and screwed up in this trade and then taking small size on this one, I just made my loss back, which is fine though. I learned a lot of lessons to be break even on this ticker. Um, so just like I said, going back to here, it's like you just when you think a stock can't just absolutely ruin you in your position, like it absolutely can. These people will do anything to get their stock up, which is just insane. So yeah, that's that. Next one is now the 17th. Um, Biggest red day of the month here, and that's because I kind of lost meticulousness. I lost discipline here. I started shorting MNK on, I believe, the 20 or the 16th and the 17th. Both were green days. And I started shorting NK on was the 17th as well? Yeah, 17th as well. So I'll try to go to the intraday chart. But like, first thing you notice is that MNK is the NYSE. Why does that matter? I mean, it's not a huge thing, but it's like for you guys, there's an order in which I like to look at net exchanges. It goes New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, AMEX, OTC, right? In that order is how crappy the stocks typically are, right? Of course, there's great NASDAQ companies. Of course, there's great New York Stock Exchange companies, but there's going to be better, fundamentally strong companies on the New York Stock Exchange, and then less on the NASDAQ, less on the AMEX, and then, of course, way less on the OTC, right? Because each exchange has less and less requirements or stricter requirements. And so I kind of completely forgot this. Like MNK is on the New York Stock Exchange, um, which again, still could have pulled. It still could have gone down. I still could have made money. I'm not saying just because it's on the New York Stock Exchange that I'm just gonna not make money or not trade it, right? But there were those little details that I just didn't account for, and I started trading this aggressively when I really shouldn't have, right? The price action wasn't telling me it. The fact that the way it was trading on this exchange wasn't telling me it. Like looking at price action versus what exchange is on, you can kind of tell. Like I sometimes can tell an AMEX stock over a NASDAQ stocks just by how it trades sometimes, just from so many years and hours of practice. But I kind of ignored that, right? And so I remember shorting like this in this action to try to get this pull, which I did, and then it zombies its way back like nonstop bouncing. So I had to cut that for like $300. I then tried shorting on the first red day here, didn't cover any into this pull, thinking it was going to go test low fours or the mid fours again. And you see this kind of a bounce, like it just nonstop buying and just controlling this. Even this pull wasn't that much. I ended up having to take it all off like in here because I realized like this just isn't breaking down. So that was just incredibly frustrating, right? Of course, a good thing I avoided this squeeze, but like I was really upset with myself, like just not meticulous at all. Same thing with NNK. Like this day, I tried shorting. This kind of almost it almost looks the same as MNK. Like it pulled in the morning, which I was short for, and it just kept holding and kept squeezing, and finally broke new high day, which is why you see this wick. I took another like $300 or $400 loss there. So just super frustrating, lost meticulousness. In this week alone, right? I had more losses than my entire December, last month. And so I tweeted about that. Like if you saw me on Twitter, I tweeted, I just kind of like I had to take a step back. So luckily I was super glad, it was Friday, the week was over. I had the weekend to just chill back, relax, 3-day weekend actually, because we had off the 20th. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to come in next week ready, prepared, and just efficient, right? I'm not going to take these silly trades and not be meticulous about how I trade them. I'm going to come ready. And so that's exactly what I did, right? Every next day was green. And so the first big one was NVAX, right? That was on the 21st. Yeah, this day. So let's go there. So it's actually this day. You see this big candle here, which looks kind of odd, but you see this huge wick. I made money on that wick. So let's go into it. Now, in terms of how well I traded this particular trade, it wasn't that great. There was a big mistake I made, which I will quickly go over. But in terms of how efficient I was with it and how just the week went, it was much better than last week. But I do want to make sure I go over this because this is a big mistake I made. So same thing, right? We have this run. Same thing you've seen with ADAP, INPX, right? There's its runs, and then the last day it has this big gap, the biggest gap it's had in the entire run up. So the question is, can it hold, right? Because if it can't, it's got a long way to come down. So that's what it did right out of the open. I mean, massive pull, right? And so I'm quickly shorting this bounce. I'm like, this is a huge pull. It's going to take a lot for it to break this and its pre-market highs. I'm going to have some conviction on this, and that's what happened. I just got short of these bounces, which is like a perfect entry in hindsight, because it was into strength. It was not into weakness, which is the key point. Pulled back, let it consolidate, and then starts fading. And I actually timed this incredibly well. I covered, I think, half my shares, like literally right around here, which was great in hindsight, right? Because I told myself, like, I kept telling myself the bounce is going to come. Like ADAP, you saw it. INPX, you kind of saw it a little bit. Like there's a bounce coming. A bigger bounce is coming. So I had covered half there, and I had half left on the end of this bounce. And so I'm thinking it's going to be the same thing as ADAP, right? It's gonna try to bounce, it's going to fail, and then it's going to continually go lower into the end of the day. So I start actually adding, right? I'm trying to learn from my mistakes from ADAP. I'm trying to say, okay, I'm going to add back into this bounce. And I think we're right. Like we have these two pulls, and I'm immediately thinking, perfect. Like this is going to work now. And all of a sudden, you can't see it in the level 2 on this price action, but there were massive bidders here, and it was incredibly aggressive, right? Like it's you can't see it in the chart, but watching it in real time, like the action of how this came back and like got back to its highs of its bounce, um, was not normal, right? It immediately sent me a red flag, and I'm like, this isn't how it should be acting. So I actually covered, like I took everything off. I was like, I don't need to stick around. This is not how it should be acting. Now, quickly it pulled. So I thought, okay, am I overreacting? Did I see what I really saw? Right? I'm trying to second guess myself. Like, did I overreact here? And so I thought, you know what? It doesn't hurt to just give it a second chance. So I put in a small starter again. I thought I was going to be right when it started to try to break down here. It held, and then it squeezed again, right? And so at this point, I cut it when it broke this 840 level, right? The new high. I cut it, so I gave back like $100 or something dollars back on that loss, which was the smart decision, right? Because it ended up squeezing right back to its highs, to new highs. So again, frustrating. It's like to try to learn from your mistake on ADAP to then get screwed over because the NVAX bounce didn't fail here. I just realized it just kind of gave me a bad feeling in my stomach because I still made like $500 at the end of the day, or like four something, but I was up over 1,200 here, right? When it was in the 750, like I was up 1,200, you know. And so what I ultimately learned is like if I'm shorting these big gappers and they fail, I don't want to stick around for the bounce, right? Just in terms of my time, my energy, my like use of resources, and even money. Um, I much rather just cover into the first pull, and then if I decide I want to reshort on the bounce and maybe wait till the bounce completely fails to get short, then I can do that, right? Make two trades out of it and make money on both, or a small loss on the second one, then not taking it all on the first and then giving it back on the second, kind of thing. So that was something I took away from this. I realized that's how I want to play these from going forward. I do want to cover it all before the first bounce. And the reason why I think I wasn't in the beginning was because I was having FOMO of missing more downside. Like I thought, what if this could just be like a dilutive? Obviously, I don't know if this. I don't think INPX is dilutive. Actually, I think now it is. They put out an ATM, which is actually why this happened right here. But I'm just thinking, what if it went red, right? What if I covered and it kept fading, right? It kept going lower and I left so much money on the table. And that's just not the right mindset, right? I'd much rather just cover early and avoid a big bounce more times than not, than thinking I need to hold everything to catch the entire meat of the move. Like that's not going to happen, right? You're not going to get the top and the bottom. It just doesn't work like that. But again, after hours, they put out an ATM. So I thought immediately, okay, this is huge, right? This is again gonna pull a lot more. So I started getting short. I got short like right out the open. I then added into this bounce, and we pulled big time. I covered a little bit into these higher lows here. I thought it was going to go lower, and I held a little bit more overnight. Now, again, I'm trying to be aggressive, kind of similar to CETX, but the problem is with this is a virus stock, right? This is a coronavirus play. And so overnight, news had come out, and so the whole sector gapped up. And so at that point, I realized, you know, it, it's easy for me to say, "Damn it, Kai, you should have covered it all here." But I'm not too mad about that, right? Because if there was no news about the coronavirus coming out, this absolutely would have gapped down lower, and I would have made more money, right? So just on the unfortunate event that news did come out, I then covered in the high sevens around the open, around the first like 30 minutes, and I just took a smaller win, right? I could have probably made like 600-700. I ended up making like 300 or 400. Not the end of the world. Without that news, I absolutely would have made even more. So I'm not gonna be mad about that. I'm more frustrated about this that I should have covered. But again, lesson learned. I know how to play them next time, and that's how that's gonna work. So then next one on the I think the 22nd through the 24th was RAKR. This is probably one of my favorite plays of the month. Yeah. So if you look at it, this is a OTC promotion. It looks kind of like a runner, but if the more promotions you see, you just can see this and tell it's very controlled. It doesn't look like necessarily a runner. More so, to me, it looks more like a promotion. So we will go to the intraday here. And so the approach I took on this was a little bit, again, it's kind of a hybrid, right? It was like half promotion, half looking runner. And so I wanted to try to treat them, combine both because I don't treat promotions the same way I treat runners. Like they may be the same framework and the same kind of process, but how I manage the trade is very different. And so I kind of did a hybrid here. So you can see here every day it's just slowly grinding. But then this last day, it parabolic, right? You saw on the daily chart, this green day was much more massive than any green day prior. And the volume was bigger. Like look at this volume, right? So when this happens like this, that's usually a sign of the top, right? For promotion, for runner, for everything, right? And so that gave me a lot of conviction. I thought to myself, you know what? I'm gonna take a little bit of risky of approach and short early. Now, again, if you're new, this is not something you do, right? I am almost 4 years in, so I can feel comfortable doing this, but this is not something you do in the beginning. I want to be making that very clear. I'm just being honest and transparent with you guys at how I traded it, but this is not how a beginner should and would. So again, we start this massive volume comes in, so I start actually getting short into this run. Only 10,000 shares, what I believe I ended up having like a 42 or 43 average, and so I was willing to make that bet that in the next morning it was going to fade, right? And if you're a long trader, this entire last 6 months, like ever since like last May or June, there's barely been any runners that can have a second day move, right? And now again, we're talking about runners, not promotions, right? But again, this was like a hybrid. And I thought to myself, if the trend of this continues, like it always has, there hasn't been a big shift in the market to show that like these runners can have a second strong day in the OTC market, right? That's why I was willing to bet and get short here because I thought it's a promotion. It's also a runner that probably is going to fail like all the rest of them do on a good day two move. So I thought if this can fail right at the open, right? I am totally comfortable with taking this trade. Now, if it broke to new highs, I probably would have had downsides. I might have kept a small position just to have some shares to short on and look to re-add higher. But ultimately, I was very convicted this would fail, and that's exactly what happened, right? I was dead on right. And so when it went red, I then doubled down. I now had 20,000 shares from like a 43, 44 average or something. Might have been even like, no, yeah, it was like 43 and a half. And we fade. We just pull super hard, right? Because now, again, it had the backside move of it failed like a runner. But again, I know this is also a promotion, so it's going to pull harder than a typical runner would. A runner, maybe, a regular runner might only pull 10 to 20%. I knew this could pull much, much more. And that's exactly what happened. It went all the way to the low 30s. I took some off here. I held for the rest of the day the rest of the day. I took some more off into here, and I was looking to take more off into a new new lows the next day. Now, next day it gapped up. It kind of just consolidated all day, so I did take it off. Didn't really leave too much on the table. I would have only made a couple $100 more. So to give only a couple $100 back is not the end of the world. I still made over, I think, 20 something hundred. I made like 2,100, I think, or 1,900, somewhere around 2,000, which is just a sweet gain for me. I'm really happy with that. Um, but yeah, so now it's just fading off, not really going anywhere. It did kind of win a liquid on us, so that plays over. But of course, here you see I made 13,000 this day. So like, why? Obviously it's literally the bulk of my month. Like, how did that happen? And that was on this RAVX. Now I will put up. It'll be like a card or a little pop up here. I'll put it in the description below. Like, I've talked about these promotions before. Um, I think my very first video lesson. Yeah, it is my first video lesson. I go over how I trade these. So I'll link that. You can go back and watch that for like extreme detail of how I go over them. But essentially on this one, this is a promotion, right? This is quite literally probably the best promotion I've seen in a very long time. Over this last summer, the OTC market and the SEC were really cracking down on these promotions by giving them the skull and crossbones, the caveat emptor, the CE, on OTCmarkets.com. I go over that in the first video lesson. So if you don't know what that is, go back and watch that. But this got the caveat, the skull and crossbones, like day 2, like right here. And normally in my past videos, usually when it gets the skull, it dies like immediately, like it literally gaps down 50% and then drops another 90%, and it plays over. This one kept going. Like it defied defying gravity, right? It literally kept going. The promoters wanted this up bad. They kept it going bad. And so this was tough, right? This was not an easy promotion to make money on. Um, I ended up getting short most of my position in by like this day, by the 25th. But the problem, well, actually, it's a blessing in disguise. I actually got bought in. I got bought in a third of my position, I believe, on the 26th. Now I did take $1,000 loss on that one buy-in. But again, I'm convicted. I know how these end. I know how these work. And so I quickly then added back over the next 3 days. I didn't have the exact same position size, but I added about half back of what I had got bought in at. Now, the reason why it's a blessing is that because normally with the skull and crossbones, with the SEC and the OTC market being so cracked down on these, I was thinking once it dumps, it's over, right? It's going to be over. It's going to die. And as you see here, it didn't, right? It dumped and it pulled back and it held. Now, normally, and it started going a second wave. Now, normally when it does a second wave, it usually does dump and starts a second wave from where it started. Like, it could have dumped and then closed around 3 and then it did a second wave to 7 again. But this time it didn't. It held almost right near its highs and then started the second wave. And so in that case, that scared me a little bit, right? But again, when you're shorting these promotions, you have to literally almost think of every scenario that could possibly happen. So when I take a trade on these, I think like, what's the absolute worst scenario I can get into, right? And so the fact that this did go much higher, and because I got bought in, so I was able to reduce my size and still maintain my trade plan. This didn't worry me all that much, right? Yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, I was down, the most I was ever down unrealized. But again, this wasn't a hold and hope situation, right? This was essentially a scenario in the plan, right? This was something I had thought of. This was not something that just happened. I was like, oh, well, guess I'm just going to hope for the best. Like, no. This was very meticulously thought out, and this is one of the scenarios I had thought about. So the fact that we were in it, I wasn't worried, right? I knew the outcome. I knew the odds of what are the odds if I take a loss? What are the odds I make a profit? And so I was fully comfortable accepting the outcome of whatever happened. Um, and again, like I said, I've, if you've been watching me a long time, these are my bread and butter. These, I know how these work inside and out. And, you see what happens, right? You see, this is exactly what I expected. I actually then added back more shares on this day because, and actually, let me make a good point here. You could say, well, Kyle, why don't you just short into this move? Like, why don't you just add more? Or why did you short so early? Like, why didn't you short later? From, I believe, December 3rd all the way to January 3rd or January 6th, there were no shares short, right? You literally had to be short early or you weren't going to get short at all, right? And that's the downside of this type of play. Like, you have to be short earlier, and ride through that pain, which is why this is not something for beginner accounts. Like, you have to be experienced. You have to see this a lot. You have to know how to manage your risk. And if you don't know how to do those things, this is not a type of play for you. So again, I was short. I had no shares short this entire time, which is why I got short earlier. And then finally dumps. Now they're become shares short. So I added on my position, which like lowered my average a little bit, which I was fine with because at this point it confirmed with me that it was over. It then actually got halted. Right. This is now my third halt that I've been in. There's been 2 pumps I've been halt before, but I reopened, and it got as low as 25 cents. I covered in 50 cents. And that was that. Made $11,000, which was my biggest gain and first 5-figure gain ever. Super, super cool, super great feeling. But again, it wasn't so much the money as it was so much that I was correct. Like, I made the best possible plan I could have. I managed it the best possible way I could have. And the money was just the outcome of that, right? It was that all the work was in here. It wasn't in me taking profits, right? The work happened far before I even took the money off and made that profit. So hopefully that makes sense. And then, so we keep going. We go into, I believe, the last week here. Yeah, the 27th through the 31st of all these virus plays, right? The coronavirus keeps getting bigger. The news headlines keep getting more scarier, right? And so we're all these stocks are running, right? And so I took a small loss on NNVC, thinking this was the top because, again, big gap day. I'm thinking it cannot fail, and it looked like it was failing, but it didn't. So I took a small loss there. Same thing with Codex. I big gap, thought it was going to fail. I was short into this like lower wick here. It then squeezed higher, so I cut that as well. So a couple of paper cuts onto the backside. But now you look at the daily charts, and then next day it gaps down right here and here. It has these huge gap down and then red days. I missed those, right? Like, same thing with the LJPC play. They just gap down too much for me to justify shorting that low. Now, of course, did they go even lower? Yeah, I could have got short and made plenty of money because it gapped down and died. But I have to play it safe, right? I can't short them down 15% and expect them to go down 30% like they did. Maybe I did underestimate them, but I'm going to play it safe more time, almost every time than not. And so I just missed those plays. Fortunately, there were some virus plays that didn't gap down that big. In fact, INO gapped up. So we're going to go into the intraday here because I did make 700 on it, and I want to go over it because it's what makes the key difference, right? Like, I've been missing all these gap down plays because they're not my bread and butter. I don't like them how they gap down so low, but the ones that gap up and fail, I've learned to really enjoy. And that's exactly what happened here. The red green move was like 4 or 540, right? And so you see here it's gapping up, right? And right out the open it fails, right? Makes a higher low, fails again. And so I'm shorting all into this. Goes red, tries to bounce, fails to bounce, pulls even lower. I cover, in this action here, and I make $700. Now, did I underestimate it and think that it can go? I almost didn't even think that it can go lower in the day. Same thing with all the virus plays. Like, I really thought they couldn't really pull off that because it wasn't like news came out that the virus is cured, right? It was still a problem. So I thought, like, yeah, they're pulling back, but I don't know how low they are. But I really underestimated them all. They all pulled back very hard, including INO. It just took it longer. You had to wait till late day. But I'm happy with the $700. It's not the end of the world. And they're all coming back. Like, they're all, if we look at Codex, like Codex is back to net highs. NNVC is back to new highs, so these should offer new opportunities into These should offer new opportunities into February. Again, virus plays are a little bit more wild because of the news. Like, the virus doesn't seem to be getting cured by the news lines, but that much might be fear based. They might just media might just try to put fear in us, but we'll just have to see. We'll have to react and see what happens. last trade, good trade of the month, was on the 29th with CYDY. Now, you see this big wick. I made money on this wick, so wasn't going to buy the breakout, right? If you watch my previous video lesson, like back in October, like breakouts are not for me. They're not my bread and butter, right? But buying an OT swizzle, or what I would call or I used to call from, if you were at the conference, I called it a momentum breakout. That's what I saw in this, and I was like, you know what, I can't not take this trade. And so, if you go into the intraday here, it was just sort of such a great looking OTC swizzle. If you know who Dom is or Jack, like they trade these all day long. And so you look at, so it's breaking out. It broke out, the day prior, and now on this day, it's holding its entire gains, right, all day. Look how it's almost like weird action that it could go this sideways for this long. But when you see this action, I've talked about this before. It's like there's only one way it's going to go. It's either going to go down or it's going to go up, right? When it consolidates this well for this long, you got two directions. So whatever direction it goes, you got a high odds of it working that way. So that's what happened. It broke the new high day here with this volume. I got long. I held overnight. And the scary part was, is that for whatever reason, my alarm clock over here broke. Like literally, the alarm was set. It was ready. It was good to go. It did not go off. So I ended up waking up on my own, like naturally waking up at like 7:30, which is 10:30 Eastern time. So an hour of the market has already gone by, and I wake up like I had a nightmare because I know what happened. I was like, oh my god, like why didn't I check my alarm clock? Like it was set, and it just didn't go off. So I'm like, holy shit, like what's my position doing? You know what I mean? Because this could have failed, right? I could have been taking a much bigger loss because I wasn't there at the open. I quickly pull up my screens and I'm like, holy shit, like I got so damn lucky, like obviously I put myself in a good position to make money because of this play, how ideal it is. But, like I said, with the previous RIKR example, like many runners have failed the second day. This was one of the first to actually succeed the next day, which I was like shocked about. So got very lucky in that sense. I ended up selling it all by the time around this when it started fading. I made like $1,100, which is like my best long in a very long time. Most months I've been unprofitable long because I only have long OTCs and like I said, they've been dying every other day. So yeah, I just got incredibly lucky, and it's something to note. Like, well, let's see going into the future months. Like, will the OTC market pick up? Like, will longs start being stronger again? We'll have to find out. So that's all of them, right? That was on the 30th here, and so ended up the month with this, 19,500. Win rate's good. Kept borrower fees pretty low. And I've seen some people comment about this, like, how are your borrow fees so low? And are these your commissions? No, my commissions are included in each and every trade, right? So the commissions for this day, they're already subtracted out of this P&L day. They're all day. It's only the overnight interest and the borrow fees that I include here. And so why is it so low? It's because I'm a cheap bastard. Like if borrow fees are too high, I'm gonna miss the play. I'm not gonna, I'm not going to overpay for a fee that I don't think I need to pay that much for. And more times than not, it ends up benefiting my favor. It ends up meaning I either avoid a loss that I didn't have to take in the first place, or I end up avoiding a play that wasn't really that great, and I end up getting borrows of a cheaper play, and it worked just fine. I make just as much money or more. So that's pretty much it. The main thing I wanted to go over, I kind of already did, which is like the gap down plays. Like Huddy and Brittany, they love these overextended gap down plays. But as you can see here, like the virus stocks and all these other plays that gap down, I'm just not comfortable with them. I do make money over the long run, but in terms of me getting full size and how to manage the trade and can I really push size and maximize my reward, I find more times than not I can't. I can't really, and of course with practice I'm sure I'll get better. Who knows, maybe a year, 2 or 3 down the line I'll be very good at them. But naturally, they're not my bread and butter. And what I've learned from this month is these large gap up plays that offer so much, they're still green today. Like they're still up 30, 40, 50% and now are failing and could potentially go red. To have that much downside and not have to worry about SSR coming on, right? Because with overextended gap downs, by the time it's 10%, you have to keep SSR in mind. Now, granted, do many of these go lower? Yeah, but some don't, right? Some trigger SSR and then it's over, right? There's not enough selling pressure to bring these down. So that's something that I'm not good with either. But with these gap up plays, there's no SSR for another 40%. You know what I mean? So it's like I feel like there's much more reward if you can time them correctly. Now, granted, they're still green in the day. So you can't just be balls to the walls aggressive right out the open. Like, you have to make sure they fail. But once they do, there's plenty of downside versus, maybe you can be more aggressive on overextended gap down because it's already red. But I just prefer big gap ups way more. We'll see how it keeps going if that trend continues. But so far, that's the first thing I'm seeing. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Going into February, will there be new promotions? Maybe. Again, the fact that RIVX got halted, um, plenty of all these other promotions have been halted, and given the skull and crossbones, like the SEC is really cracking down on them. Um, we'll see. If they don't happen, again, like I said, that's why I'm adapting to Nasdaq. That's why I've been trying to work so hard because, again, like, Gutani would buy these promotions back in like 2012 and 2013, and that strategy isn't around anymore, right? So I'm not saying that shorting promotions would go away necessarily, but it's like I'm not going to rely on them. You know what I mean? I'm not going to just assume they'll always be there because they really might not. So that's why I'm learning Nasdaq so well. That's why I'm pushing them so hard, to really have that become my main source of trading. But other than that, guys, thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys in February. Later.